Hello, everybody, and welcome to Reproaction's Strategies for Fighting Anti-Abortion Pregnancy Centers. It's our first webinar back in the new year, so welcome and thank you so much for joining us. I will go ahead and get started. So I will introduce myself. My name is Jessica Ensley. I use she, her pronouns. I'm the Senior Vice President of Outreach here at Reproaction, and I am based in DC, and I will kick it over to my co-host, Annie.
Hi everyone, thanks for being here. This is Annie Romano. I use she, her pronouns. I am the Senior Special Projects Coordinator at Reproaction, and I am based in Atlanta, Georgia.
Great, so here is our agenda for today's webinar. I will introduce our organization. I'll kick it over to Annie to walk us through today's topic, and then we will go through our lovely panel for a discussion before we head to next steps and an audience Q&A. And you can join in the conversation by live posting #Reproaction on Blue Sky and tagging us at reproaction.bluesky.social. Okay, so to introduce our organization, Reproaction, we lead bold access to increase access to abortion and advance reproductive justice. We are known for our left flank analysis, our willingness to hold folks on all sides accountable, whether they be allies or opposition, and we are committed to nonviolent direct action. And I will kick it over to Annie.
Thank you, Jessica. Yeah, I wanted to first orient us in what anti-abortion pregnancy centers are and to provide some background as to why we as an organization and as a movement feel called to fight against these centers. So first and foremost, anti-abortion pregnancy centers, which you all may know as crisis pregnancy centers or pregnancy resource centers, fake clinics, etc., ultimately exist to dissuade people from having abortions. These centers advertise free services like pregnancy tests, ultrasounds, baby supplies, and counseling to those experiencing an unplanned pregnancy. And for people without health insurance, young people, or those living in rural areas where there's not many options for reproductive health care, these promises can seem especially attractive, and people might not know what sort of risks there may be from visiting an anti-abortion pregnancy center, especially because anti-abortion pregnancy centers use deception to attract clients. And this deception takes place in a few different ways. A great example is just in what they often name their centers, often including words like options or choices in the names to appear more comprehensive in their offerings. We also know that anti-abortion pregnancy centers often locate themselves near abortion clinics. And another concerning way in which they use deception is through their efforts to appear medical. Most anti-abortion pregnancy centers are not licensed medical clinics and are largely volunteer run by people who might not be trained medical staff. But regardless, anti-abortion pregnancy centers try to appear medical through showing photos of medical seeming professionals in their advertisements, and even by making claims that people's private health information is covered by HIPAA. But because most of these centers are unlicensed as medical clinics, they are likely not bound by HIPAA rules, and so we really can't be sure that people's data will be kept private, on top of the questionable quality of care due to most centers' unlicensed medical status. So obviously a lot of this deception is occurring before anti-abortion pregnancy centers even get people in the door, but what people encounter inside these centers is often a lot of disinformation, shame, and stigma about abortion and contraception. These centers often make false claims about abortion or contraception, and many often promote that medication abortion can be reversed via an unproven and unethical theory called abortion pill reversal. And last but not least, our taxpayer dollars may actually be going to fund anti-abortion pregnancy centers with very little accountability or transparency as to how that money is used. Oftentimes, anti-abortion pregnancy centers will receive funding to offer family planning services, despite the fact that most anti-abortion pregnancy centers do not offer contraceptives, well woman exams, or prenatal care. It's really sad that many states fund anti-abortion pregnancy centers when there are many other ways in which this money, and sometimes those figures are in the millions, could be used to support actual reproductive health care. Next slide, please. I think it can be pretty natural for us to wonder how anti-abortion pregnancy centers are able to use deception and spread disinformation and even take public funding when they're largely unlicensed and lack oversight. There's a few challenges that we can run into when fighting anti-abortion pregnancy centers that we should kind of all be thinking about when we're planning our action. So a common misconception about anti-abortion pregnancy centers is that they're like a small mom and pop church-run charity that runs on community donations and volunteers, but that's just not really the reality. Anti-abortion pregnancy centers bring in over $1 billion per year in revenue, and most anti-abortion pregnancy centers belong to a greater network. And these networks are incredibly well connected in political, media, and corporate circles. They're also connected to highly litigious, powerful legal organizations that want to protect them, because ultimately anti-abortion pregnancy centers are the backbone of the anti-abortion movement. Another challenge that we should be aware of is that, especially after Dobbs, anti-abortion pregnancy centers significantly outnumber legitimate abortion and reproductive health providers, with estimates of how many centers are in the US being between 2,500 and 3,000. This means there might not be many places for young folks or those in rural areas or who are low income to get low cost pregnancy care or baby supplies, which can make anti-abortion pregnancy centers seem more appealing or accessible. Some people might even be referred to anti-abortion pregnancy centers by those in their communities, their churches, their Department of Public Health. So part of our fight is really to challenge public perception of these centers as charitable and to really enforce the message that anti-abortion pregnancy centers may be a risk to our data privacy, our health, and that our taxpayer dollars should not be going to fund them. Next slide, please. So now that we know a little bit more about what anti-abortion pregnancy centers are and some of the challenges that may be involved in fighting them, I want to give a brief overview about some recent efforts to combat these centers before we hear from our guest panelists. So on the legislative front, there's been quite a few efforts statewide and federally in the past 10 or so years. One really notable example is from 2015 when California passed the Reproductive Fact Act. This would have required anti-abortion pregnancy centers to publicly state their unlicensed status. Unfortunately, that law was struck down by the Supreme Court in 2018 in the very frustrating Mifla v. Becerra case. And then there's a few other examples of legislative efforts that I've listed here. There was a law passed in Colorado in 2023 where they tried to tackle abortion pill reversal. It's since been tied up in lawsuits. There's also a federal bill called the Stop Anti-Abortion Disinformation Act that's been introduced before, will hopefully be introduced again, to tackle the deceptive advertising piece of anti-abortion pregnancy centers. Another way that we've seen action against anti-abortion pregnancy centers unfold is through lawsuits. Some states have tried bringing lawsuits against anti-abortion pregnancy centers. For example, in 2024, state attorneys general in New York and California sued several anti-abortion pregnancy centers, including a major network, for using false and misleading statements to promote abortion pill reversal. The centers have, of course, countersued, and these legal battles are ongoing, but there is a lot of value in drawing attention to anti-abortion pregnancy centers so that our elected officials can take action. And last but not least, there's also another way to take action that can feel a lot more accessible to folks, which is the public education approach. Here at Reaper Action, we actually have a new anti-abortion pregnancy center toolkit on our website that details a number of ways for anyone to get involved in educating the public about these centers. The toolkit walks us through some actions like tabling, or writing a letter to the editor, or hosting a teach-in to raise awareness about anti-abortion pregnancy centers in our communities. And we also have a database of every anti-abortion pregnancy center in the country on our website, which can be a really good place to start when planning an action. Public education is super valuable because a lot of people just don't know what anti-abortion pregnancy centers are or how to identify them. And public education can also be state-run. We saw last year in Massachusetts, they ran a state-funded anti-abortion pregnancy center public education campaign. They ran billboards and ads and signs, et cetera, to warn people about the dangers of anti-abortion pregnancy centers and directed them to actual reproductive healthcare clinics, which is an amazing feat. And it really speaks to the importance of raising awareness to those in our communities and even to our elected officials about these centers. Unfortunately, and pretty protectively, those involved in the Massachusetts public education campaign are being sued. The campaign's still out there, and it's hopefully not going to be the last one that we see. So that's all for me with a little bit of background, but I'm going to pass it over to Jessica to introduce our first guest.
Thank you so much, Annie. I really appreciated that walkthrough, very informative. Now it is my pleasure to introduce our first panelist, Carrie Baker. Carrie N. Baker is a professor in the program for the study of women, gender, and sexuality at Smith College in Northampton, Massachusetts, and a co-founder of the 5-college program in reproductive health, rights, and justice. She recently authored the open access book, Abortion Pills, U.S. History and Politics. Baker is the former president of the Abortion Rights Fund of Western Massachusetts, a current board member of Planned Parenthood Advocacy Fund of Massachusetts, and a co-founder of the Abortion Truth Campaign, which works to protect people from anti-abortion crisis pregnancy centers, disinformation, and predatory practices. She is a contributing editor and regular writer at Ms. Magazine and has a radio show, Feminist Futures, on WHMP 101.5 in Northampton. Carrie, thank you so much for joining us today.
It's great to be here. Thank you.
So my first question for you is, can you give us a little background on what prompted the Abortion Truth Campaign and some of the actions that you all have taken?
Absolutely. So the Abortion Truth Campaign began really as just a small group of concerned citizens. I had been covering these anti-abortion centers in my public writing for Ms. And I had a New York Times guest essay, and I wrote a few other pieces. So I was very aware of what they did. I teach here at Smith, and I had been teaching about them. But in the course of my public writing, students put me in touch with a student from the eastern part of the state who had gone to a anti-abortion center in Worcester and had a very traumatic experience. Her name was Hannah, and she thought it was a medical clinic. She got in there, and it was just very, very traumatic for her. They treated her terribly. And so that made me really personally committed to making sure that people understood that these are not medical centers, that they are out to coerce you and misinform you. And so I kind of had fire in the belly after writing that piece. And then a friend of mine, Jennifer McKenna, had just recently written a report called Design to Deceive about these anti-abortion centers. So Jennifer and I got together and we said, we really need to do something to raise awareness and to organize to oppose these centers. So we created this organization, and our website is abortiontruthcampaign.org. And we basically put the research on there, recent news. We identified where the CPCs were in Massachusetts and how to distinguish between these anti-abortion centers and real medical clinics. We were trying to sort of provide a central resource for folks to help guide them through figuring out what's real and what's not real. We also put on there information about things that people could do. Like our Attorney General had created a consumer protection advisory and a complaint process. So we put information about how people could file complaints against these anti-abortion centers. We also helped work on a number of local city ordinances related to deceptive advertising, because like where we lived, if we put in abortion clinic near me, we would get a whole list of these anti-abortion centers. So we were like, okay, they are clearly engaging in deceptive advertising. And so we did a lot of organizing with local city council members and got a number of ordinances passed across the state. And so the organization began to recruit folks from other parts of the state, and we filed complaints with the Attorney General's office about, for instance, abortion pill reversal techniques that these places were using. We also lobbied at the state level for legislation and actually won a bill in the last session to require anybody using ultrasounds, it has to be supervised by a licensed medical professional operating in their scope of practice. So we're now working on trying to get that enforced. So we've recently been in touch with the Department of Public Health trying to see how are you enforcing this law. And we also are trying to do our own investigation. Are there anti-abortion centers that are using ultrasounds without adequate supervision? And then if we can find them, we're going to make complaints. So we really are using multiple avenues: local government, state government, public education. We've been writing op-eds, we've been doing talks, we've been showing up at rallies, trying to raise awareness about these deceptive organizations and to go after them, to hold them accountable.
That's wonderful. Thank you for sharing that. And it's fairly reminiscent to how I got involved in fighting against CPCs. I was in college at the time, and I had an op-ed or a weekly column, and I had friends who would go into the center that said free pregnancy tests when they were in trouble. One who was searching for Plan B and went in, and they absolutely refused to help her in a time that she was scared. And so I went in and reported on it. So that is yeah,
Great.
yeah, very much targeting of college kids is a prime tactic for them. But I was in college when Roe was still in place. So I wanted to ask you, can you talk to us about how these anti-abortion pregnancy centers tactics have changed post-Dobbs? And what do you think is next for them as they continue to face increased calls for accountability from all levels through, as you said, the multiple different approaches that you all are taking?
Well, I will say that they are really targeting states that have legal abortion because they know that people are traveling to those states. And so they're doing their best to try to interfere so that people can't find real medical care and that they end up in these other states in CPCs. And they often share information. So they collect people's private medical information, claiming that it's HIPAA protected, which it's not because they don't charge for their services and they're not filing insurance claims. And then they share that private medical information through technology with their parent organizations. And there's been at least some evidence that they've turned that information over to the police, because in states that ban abortion, if they can find people from their states that have gone to other states and use these services, that can be used to sort of bully and terrorize and potentially even criminally go after people. So they are targeting pro-choice states. They have a lot more money. The Trump administration and states, conservative states, are redirecting a lot of money, like Title X money that's supposed to go to family planning clinics is now being redirected to these anti-abortion centers. And they're using that money to buy ultrasound machines to try to look more medical, even though they're not medical. They are increasing surveillance. They're using sophisticated digital technologies like chatbots or other, surveillance mechanisms to, like, if you go visit one of their websites and you respond to a chat box, they all of a sudden have a bunch of information about you that they're already collecting. They also are, they are framing themselves as helping women that can't access abortion post-Dobbs. So they're saying, oh, she has this unwanted pregnancy. We're going to provide her with help. Well, Jennifer McKenna's study, Designed to Deceive, shows that these organizations are not actually spending their money on diapers and baby clothes to help people who carried to term unwanted pregnancies. They are not doing that. And that they pretend that they're actually helping people, where they'll maybe give them one box of diapers, which like you can use in an afternoon. So they pretend to be helping people, but they're really not helping people. A lot of the money they're collecting, we don't even know. Jennifer's research showed that they collected $1.7 billion last year, and there's only accounting for a fraction of that. A lot of it's just sort of disappearing, but a lot of it's also being used for lobbying. So for instance, in Ohio, when there was the ballot referendum, they spend a lot of that CPC money on lobbying. And this is even though they're 501c3s. So there are organizations like Reproductive Health and Freedom Watch, which Jennifer works for, that's trying to track the money and see how they're using this money. In addition, they are very lawyered up, and they are making lots of bullying threats and bringing bullying lawsuits like the one you mentioned about our public education campaign. When we were going around doing campaigns to try to pass local ordinances, these high-powered lawyers would show up and threaten the city councilors with lawsuits and bankrupting them, even though they had bogus claims. So, that's also something that really concerns me, is that they're trying to intimidate us from even informing people about the truth. So we're up against a behemoth of a force, but we've got truth on our side, we've got justice on our side, and we've just got to keep fighting.
Wow, I had not put together the potential criminalization that could take place between CPCs and states where abortion access is more available, and people from out of state coming in. That's horrifying. Wow, thank you so much for that. My
Yeah.
last question for now is, how do you begin teaching others about anti-abortion pregnancy centers who might not know about them or who might see them as benevolent?
So I'll go back to how I started my own journey, which was Hannah's story. This interview I did with this young college student who thought she was going to a reproductive health clinic and ended up at a CPC. I have used that story over and over again in my advocacy in Massachusetts. It is such a powerful story, and I really encourage listeners to go to it. I think that we're going to share a link to that story. It was a Ms. Magazine article. And, to hear that young person's voice, she had never had reproductive health care. She was 18 years old. She was a first-year college student. She thought she was getting real medical care. And I asked her, I was like, so how has this affected your, how you feel about doctors? And she's like, I don't trust them. I don't trust people in a white lab coat. And I'm thinking, oh my God, that is such a traumatic way to begin your relationship with the medical profession. And and then to hear her, she was so eloquent in talking about how it made her feel, how it impacted her perceptions of medical care and her sense of her own security and her own relationship to her body. I mean, I guess so. Storytelling is really what I'm saying, and that's just one story. But we have another case here in Massachusetts where a woman went to a anti-abortion center again in Worcester, Massachusetts, and they gave her an ultrasound, told her everything was fine. About 2 weeks later, she had these intense abdominal pains. She went to the hospital. She had an ectopic pregnancy and she lost her fallopian tube. She has now brought a class action suit against the anti-abortion center. And, to tell her story is so compelling to people that, they just don't know what they're doing. And they just tell them, oh, everything's fine, because they don't want them to go to real medical care. And then she ends up losing her fallopian tube. Or the story down in Kentucky where they were using expired sterilization solution on a transvaginal ultrasound wand and using this wand on patient after patient, inserting the wand into people's vagina when it was not sterilized. I mean, these people are hacks. They don't know what they're doing, and they're a public health hazard. So I think, I guess, going back to your, also that they're preying on minors. They're doing things like transvaginal ultrasounds on 14, 15-year-olds, without parental consent. So I think we need to really characterize what they're doing, the sort of violations that they're doing, and the impacts of those violations on people's lives. And we need to tell those stories and get the people who've had those experiences, like Hannah, to tell those stories, because they are so, so compelling.
Wow. I'm glad this is audio only because I wouldn't want anyone to see my facial reactions to those horrifying stories. My
Really
gosh.
horrifying.
I hope all of those folks get justice for what was done to them, and are getting proper medical care now. Thank you so much, Carrie, for your thoughtfulness and your expertise. If folks have questions, we're going to be moving on to our next panelist, so I'm about to pass it off back to Annie. But if folks have questions, please feel free to put them in, and we'll get to that at the end. Thank you so much, Carrie.
Yeah, great to be here.
All right, I will pass it over to Annie to introduce our next panelist.
Thank you, Jessica, and thank you, Carrie. I am pleased to introduce our next guest, Agbo Ikor, who's a she, her pronouns. Agbo works with Spark Reproductive Justice Now as their policy and advocacy director, operating at the intersection of reproductive justice and queer liberation. Though Agbo has found a theoretical home with reproductive justice, her initial introduction to organizing was through feminist issues like pay equity, sex discrimination, and civic engagement. Agbo organized around queer and trans issues, successfully campaigning for her university to provide gender-neutral bathrooms for all students and facilitating political education for campus leaders in LGBTQIA issues. She also has a passion for mental health, justice, and advocacy. Upon graduating from Vanderbilt University with her bachelor's in women and gender studies, philosophy, and psychology, Agbo went on to intern with Atlanta Women for Equality, AWE, a legal aid organization advocating for women and girls who face sex discrimination on the job or at school. During her time at AWE, Agbo advocated for Title IX protections to extend to victims of sexual assault on college and university campuses. She also planned and implemented a digital campaign for Black Women's Equal Pay Day. Agbo has dedicated her professional and personal life to advocating for the liberation of Black women and is grateful for the reproductive justice framework. In her free time, you can find her reading and daydreaming. Thanks so much, Agbo, for being here with us today. Agbo, are you with us?
All right, it just unmuted for me. Awesome. I hope you can hear me okay.
Yes, you are in. Welcome and thanks for being with us.
Thank you for having me.
Awesome. I wanted to first start out just by asking you about Fake Clinic Suck. Can you tell our audience what Fake Clinic Suck is and why it began, and just kind of give us an overview about some actions you all have taken in the past and maybe what you have planned for this year?
Absolutely. So where to start? So Fake Clinic Suck, this is a state level campaign here in Georgia that I currently chair to defund anti-abortion centers in Georgia. So currently, Georgia gives about $2 million a year to anti-abortion centers. In 2016, Georgia passed the Positive Alternatives to Pregnancy and Parenting Grant Program. This was a bill that would grant tax dollars to anti-abortion centers. They actually allocated to one, I guess, collaborative of anti-abortion centers called Life Resources of Georgia. And since then, every year, upwards of $2 million go towards anti-abortion centers. So around 2020, I began to chair this campaign to defund anti-abortion centers. So with this funding passing in 2016, that was actually my first foray into repro advocacy in Georgia. So when I was able to get a job at Spark and start organizing with Spark and then to chair this campaign, it just seemed very like kismet. So this campaign was founded with the knowledge that anti-abortion centers are harmful, that folks aren't aware of what anti-abortion centers are. So very grateful to Professor Baker and to you all for putting on this webinar, because anti-abortion centers are so successful because they are so mystified, that folks aren't able to recognize what they are, that they are able to kind of position themselves as actual health clinics when they're not. Annie, I believe you said it earlier that they are sort of the storefront of the anti-abortion movement. So it's really, really imperative that we are not lending our support as a state to these facilities. So that was kind of a rundown of how this campaign came to be. In the past, since we launched it in 2020, we've really focused on kind of building our power around the campaign, connecting with other organizations. So it's not just my organization that does this work. We are a part of the Amplify Georgia Collaborative. And with that, we are also joined by other organizations like Sister Love, Urge, Feminist Women's Health Center. I am sure I am leaving some amazing organizations out. But we really focused on sort of building power with these organizations and connecting with our communities. An integral part of this campaign is also building up the leadership of those who are just interested in fighting this issue. So we've hosted various opportunities for engagement. We've hosted review-a-thons where we gather and leave reviews on anti-abortion centers. Nothing untruthful, really just saying through Google, through Yelp, that these places do not offer abortion services. They do not offer STI testing. They don't offer actual medical, just healthcare. We have done weed pasting actions where we have these posters that we put on, like we put up around Atlanta, some near anti-abortion centers that basically are saying fake clinics suck. If I can cuss, fuck fake clinics, just putting them around Atlanta. So, at least folks are getting a general awareness of fake clinics' existence and that they're harmful. More recently, we've started hosting monthly community chats where we invite just our community members to join us virtually to talk about the issue, maybe engage in some actions. Our next one actually is going to be at the end of February. And literally earlier today, I just got out of a meeting. We were talking about hosting like a zine-like workshop where we're going to create a helpful zine for folks who want to learn about anti-abortion centers. So throughout this campaign, even though we're doing just amazing work organizing and legislatively, there's also ways for folks to build up their leadership. And then the last thing I'll say, just referring to our legislative goals. So as I said, we hope to defund anti-abortion centers, meaning take away that $2+ million a year that we currently as a state give to anti-abortion centers. But not only defund, but reallocate that funding to actual helpful services. Right now, we're in conversation with some legislators to maybe pass a resolution to reallocate that funding, at least for this year, to TANF, Temporary Assistance for Needy Families, because that's actually a service that helps folks. And ultimately, we really hope to have some permanent reallocation of that money to actual helpful services. One other legislative ask that we have is to really address the lies that anti-abortion centers are allowed to basically tell us, the deception that they really get away with. So another bill that we plan on introducing actually this year is this Crisis Pregnancy Center Fraud Prevention Act. This is a bill to prevent anti-abortion centers from essentially lying about the services they offer, lying about whether you're protected by HIPAA, everything that Carrie mentioned previously, all of the lies they tell. We're hoping to make it so that they can't do that and that there is a means of accountability if they are to lie to folks. We don't want to see websites where they have lab coats on when there's no licensed medical practitioner on staff. We want them to be transparent on whether they offer abortion or not on their website so people aren't wasting their time, things like that. So this year, we plan on introducing that legislation. We have a sponsor. We're really, really excited about that. And then we also plan on introducing defunding legislation as well. So really, really excited about this issue, really excited that, we are building power and momentum around this issue. And yeah, happy to talk about it more.
Thank you, Agro, for giving us all of that information about fake clinics suck. I, as a Georgian myself, am just always really, really excited to hear that people are mobilizing around this issue in our state. So appreciate the work that y'all do so much and very excited to follow it this year. I wanted to ask you another question, just kind of about Georgia specifically, and just being in the South and in a state with a 6-week ban and one that funds anti-abortion pregnancy centers in the millions. So how do anti-abortion pregnancy centers specifically affect states with abortion restrictions? And what do we wish that our allies in abortion-friendlier states knew about our unique challenges tackling these centers in the South?
So that's a great question. So what we've seen, especially with the overturning of Roe, with the Dobbs decision, is that anti-abortion centers are trying to position themselves as legitimate alternatives to abortion clinics. So in the state of Georgia, there are currently 90 anti-abortion centers and 5 abortion clinics. Most Georgia counties do not have an OBGYN. So anti-abortion centers try to position themselves as actual health practitioners that can help pregnant people who are seeking resources when, as you've heard this call, they are not. So that's kind of the landscape that we're looking at when it comes to organizing around this issue in the South. Anti-abortion centers are powerful. Again, they are not like mom and pop or your local church run organizations. These are heavily funded by the anti-abortion movement organizations that really have this very clear agenda, anti-abortion agenda. So when it comes to organizing around this issue in Georgia, talking to legislators, of course, we're going up against a very unfriendly state to our cause. But at the very least, I feel like most people can agree that we don't want pregnant people being lied to. We think that that is a danger to folks seeking healthcare, especially with maternal mortality being as high as it is, especially in the state of Georgia. So having organizations that lie to folks, to lie to pregnant people, which can impede their access to care, that's really, really dangerous. So that's really what we're navigating here, is fighting like the real world violence and harm that anti-abortion centers do, not positioning them as legitimate alternatives to abortion clinics. We really, ideally, we really want a plethora of fully funded abortion clinics, but unfortunately, especially with the Dobbs decision, that is not the case. So we're hoping that, well, what we're also seeing is that more states, or more southern states, or states that are more hostile to abortion, are trying to give more funds, even more than the money that they right now give even more funds to anti-abortion centers. So we're hoping that we don't see more of that. Georgia currently does not give TANF funds to anti-abortion centers, though there are some states where that does occur. We're hoping that that's not going to happen here. So we're just keeping an eye on that. So yeah, I hope I answered your question. It really is just like a lot to navigate, just, with a state hostile to abortion in general, but also fully supporting these entities that really just harm folks, whether you want to have an abortion or not.
Yeah, no, that was a great answer. I appreciate you kind of getting into like the visioning piece of what we want in the future and why we're fighting. I think that's so important to keep in mind throughout all of this. So thank you so much for speaking with us. I'm sure we'll hear from you again during the Q&A. But for now, I'm going to pass it to Jessica to introduce our next guest.
Thank you so much. All right, last but certainly not least is Lisa Battisfor. She is the founder and president of Reproductive Transparency Now, RTN, a volunteer-run grassroots organization whose mission is to advance reproductive justice by raising awareness about anti-abortion crisis pregnancy centers through direct action, education, and advocacy. Founded in 2021 by a group of activists and abortion clinic escorts in Chicago, RTN envisions a future where opposition to crisis pregnancy centers is a more central part of the fight for abortion access nationwide, so that everyone is able to receive the reproductive health care they deserve. Before founding RTN, Lisa volunteered as an abortion clinic escort with Illinois Choice Action Team and as a big sister with Big Brothers Big Sisters of Metropolitan Chicago. Outside of her advocacy work, Lisa has over 15 years of experience in the healthcare and retail industries. She graduated with a bachelor's degree in biological sciences from Northwestern University and a master's in business administration from the Kellogg School of Management. RTN has been featured in the Chicago Reader, Block Hub Chicago, and WBEZ Chicago for its role in mobilizing the community to protest crisis pregnancy centers and support policies that hold them accountable for deceiving and misleading pregnant people in Illinois. To learn more about RTN and join the movement to stop fake clinics, visit reprotransparency.org. Lisa, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you so much for having me. I really feel so humbled to be a part of this panel.
Absolutely. And you should feel right on par on this panel. So happy to have you. So my first question for you is, can you tell us more about Reproductive Transparency Now? You're an organization dedicated specifically to raising awareness and taking action against anti-abortion pregnancy centers. Why focus on that issue, and what has your organization been able to accomplish so far?
Yeah, so, as you kind of mentioned in the intro, something that became very obvious to me while I was volunteering as an abortion clinic escort was that there was this issue of crisis pregnancy centers in our city that no one seemed to be talking about. So day after day, week after week, me and all of my fellow clinic escorts are outside helping to protect, our patients who are going into the clinic. And there are these groups of anti-abortion protesters screaming, shoving pamphlets in their face, all kinds of things, and telling them to go down the street to a certain address. And as I started asking more questions, as I would get copies of pamphlets that they were handing out, and I started asking questions about, what are these places? And it's in my nature to do deep research. And that's where I learned really this iceberg of anti-abortion centers that this country is facing, and that there is so much hidden beneath the surface. And so with a small group of us and some fellow advocates, we decided to flip the script on them a little bit. We said, how can we use what we know about protecting bodily autonomy and protecting our clinic patients, while also bringing awareness to the fact that there are these anti-abortion pregnancy centers all over our community. Yes, even Chicago, such a liberal city. And we started off really by not necessarily having a long-term plan, but holding a small protest out in front of a local crisis pregnancy center every week. And after doing that for about 2.5 months, we saw an opportunity to connect that work and to connect all of those eyeballs, right, that were seeing us, that were seeing our message about anti-abortion centers being so deceptive, and connecting that to a larger kind of educational resource. And so that's when we started spending more time on developing small private education sessions for local community groups and student groups, and building out our Instagram to kind of help house a lot of that knowledge. And so since our founding at this point, we've held about 80 events, including our educational programming and our protest marches and rallies. And we have gotten the attention of thousands and thousands of people through direct interaction at our events, flyering, protests, discussions at tabling events, and teaching people in depth about these places. And essentially, I think what it comes down to, right, we talked about kind of the different aspects of this work that can really connect to people. And when you can connect that storytelling, and when you can connect the horrors of what is happening behind closed doors at anti-abortion centers, and then you highlight that it does not matter where you live, it is happening in your community, that is a triple threat.
Hell yeah, I love that. That's awesome. Protest CPCs. It reminds me of when Repro Action did a co-protest with Sister Song. I want to say in Atlanta, Georgia, many years ago. And after that, they changed the name of the clinic. So that stuff works. And it leads me to my next question is, how can people get started with campaigns to raise awareness around these anti-abortion pregnancy centers in their own communities? And can you walk us through sort of the formation of those protests, campaigns, actions?
Yeah, and I really do want to reiterate, right? It does not matter where you live. There is an opportunity to be active in this area, right? So where you live will affect how you approach it, and certain guardrails you might have to follow. But no matter where you live, there is something you can do. And being a volunteer-run organization who focuses its direct action very much in the local area, the local community, my advice would be to anyone who's listening, keep it simple. So anything you do thoughtfully is going to be incremental. It's going to be more than what's being done today. So I would say, grab some friends, make some signs, go out there with a goal of getting people to understand that there is an anti-abortion pregnancy center in their community, and it is not what they think it is. Have a couple of flyers ready. Be thoughtful about, always be thoughtful about how your action will impact clients going in and out of a crisis pregnancy center. But with that in mind, and with the bodily autonomy of others in mind, educate the community. One discussion could lead to 10 more discussions after that. Most people do not know crisis pregnancy centers exist. And I think once you get over that initial hump, right, of I'm just going to organize something small with a few friends, you start to get inspired to want to do other things. So Agbo mentioned review-a-thons. We do those as well. In fact, when I was first developing the plans for Reproductive Transparency Now, Agbo, I attended one of your review-a-thon events, and I took a lot of inspiration from that. And so every little action counts. So in terms of kind of planning for an event like that, you need to be aware of what your rights are, because you need to do this thoughtfully and safely, right? What are your rights in the kind of local municipality as well as in your state? So for example, in Chicago, Illinois, we know, right, that we can have a small group of people on public property demonstrating. And in certain areas, there are noise ordinances. And we adhere to those rules as a protection mechanism, right? So that we can carry out our mission safely for everybody. Because the goal is getting people to notice that there's an anti-abortion center in their neighborhood. Then maybe once you do that event, take some pictures, write a letter to the editor, write into your local newspaper. And again, keep it simple. You don't have to shoot for the stars on every single action you take. Start small, build up your confidence. That's how we've run RTN from the beginning. And last summer, I would say we did a true, what I would call, public education campaign through our organization. We called it the worst festival of all time. And it was a very tongue-in-cheek message. And it goes back to relating to the local community. Chicago is very well known for its street festivals and music festivals throughout the summer. And so we started the worst festival of all time, which was what we were calling the network of anti-abortion pregnancy centers in our city. And we would have groups of volunteers outside of street festivals all summer long, handing out flyers, handing out wristbands, and letting people know that here's your ticket, right, to the worst festival. Not that you really need it, because you're already in it. They are here, they are everywhere. And it got people's attention because it was colorful, fun, tongue-in-cheek. So you can also have a little bit of fun with it while taking on a very serious issue.
Absolutely. I think that's really important, that messaging that it doesn't have to be all or nothing, and starting small and making it fun can really keep you going. I can attest the work that I did on that one crisis pregnancy center in my college town. I left a negative review. It's still there. A decade later, and it's been seen thousands of times. I still get updates from it sometime. And they have the people working there giving 5-star reviews. So it's very important to be transparent to people in your community about, what this place is, what your experience is. All of that is very, very important. Thank you so much, Lisa, for your time and expertise.
Thank you so much.
Awesome. So I am going to take us into some next steps. So first, you can plug into ReproAction campaigns. You can sign up for our alerts at reproaction.org. You can hold anti-abortion pregnancy centers accountable at our campaign link there. Also pretty prominent on our website if you go there. You can follow us on social media. On Facebook, X, Instagram, and Blue Sky. And I will also take this opportunity to plug our anti-abortion pregnancy center database on our website to look up where your local anti-abortion pregnancy center is. And it'll give you some more information about address, tax ID, good stuff like that. And save the date for our next webinar, Understanding the Difference, Emergency Contraception and Medication Abortion Are Not the Same. That will take place Tuesday, February 25th at noon Eastern Standard Time. Okay, so we are going to get into the Q&A portion. So please fill that out if you have any burning questions. My first question, I want to pass it to Agbo. Can you explain what you think true accountability for anti-abortion pregnancy centers would look like?
Yeah, great question. So with our pregnancy center fraud prevention, it's a tongue twister. With that bill, accountability looks like paying a fine. Accountability looks like having to post publicly with like the same medium that they lied to folks, that essentially they lied, a retraction. Accountability looks like putting on their window or on their door that they are a center that does not provide abortion services or STIs. So when we say accountability, we really mean some means of either them paying restitution or them kind of mediating the harm that they have already caused. So that's really the spirit of this bill, is to really have them have like no reason or no incentive to lie to folks. We're hoping to have the Attorney General be a supporter of this bill as well, because the means of accountability will essentially come from that office. So yeah.
Awesome. Thank you so much. My next question, I want to open it up for the whole panel. So whoever wants to jump in first, please do. Do you all have any success stories from your time working to combat anti-abortion pregnancy centers that you would be willing to share?
Well, I mean, I'll just say, I think that the fact that we have this $1 million that we got the legislature to contribute towards creating a statewide public education campaign, which included, signage in buses and, digital media and, informing people about the difference between reproductive health clinics and these fake clinics. And that, we got to work hand in hand with the Department of Public Health to develop that program and sort of inform what it looked like, how they talked about the issues. And also our collaboration with the Attorney General's office, that we've been able to file these complaints, that they're investigating these CPCs, that we've passed ordinances in multiple municipalities. All of that raises awareness. When you get a city council to adopt an ordinance, the newspaper covers it and people come and testify, and all of that is about raising awareness and condemning these organizations that are harming people, that are misleading people. So I think those are some of the examples I would give.
I can share an example that, on a smaller scale, and what, I think everyday people can accomplish, right? I was speaking on a panel educating on crisis pregnancy centers. And after the panel, a woman who was in the audience, she was a student, came up to me and she handed me a pamphlet. And that pamphlet was from the crisis pregnancy center nearest to campus. And she told me that she had been there once, was likely to go again, and she felt something was off, but she didn't know what. And it was because I had called that facility out by name, and I described what you would probably expect from going there. She was able to make that connection to say that's why they were stringing her along, because they wanted to make sure she wasn't going to pursue getting an abortion. And, in terms of, activism at a grassroots level, that to me is a success story that, our leadership team carries with us from year to year, because that's what it's all about.
If I can go, I think anytime we're able to just shine light on the issue, that's a success. Lisa, when you said that you attended one of our review-a-thons, I was just so happy. And that really just points to success to me, that folks are seeing the work that we do and repeating it in like their own neighborhoods. So having this issue spread, having work around this issue spread due to the work that we're doing, I'm just so happy to hear that.
Wonderful. Thank you all. My last question, again, open to all the panelists here. What sort of resources would be better to provide a friend facing an unplanned pregnancy who may be looking for low or no cost resources?
So I used to be the president of the Abortion Rights Fund of Western Massachusetts. There are abortion rights funds all across the country that will help people access real reproductive care and help them pay for it. In addition, there is a robust network of telemedicine abortion providers that are providing abortion inexpensively and quickly and privately through telemedicine and mailing pills to all 50 states. Those are organizations like Aid Access, ABUZZ, the MAP. All those can be found on the website of Plan C, which is plancpills.org. And there's a drop-down menu by state, and you can find your state, find out what the options for free or reduced cost abortion pills are. In states that ban abortion, there are community networks sharing pills for free. You can also Plan C directs people to reliable websites selling abortion pills for as little as $25.
Awesome. Thank you, Carrie. Agbo, Lisa, anything else to add on resources?
So I can just echo, a portion of what Carrie mentioned. Abortion funds really are the groups doing the work on the ground who know the community landscape well and can help people from all different areas navigate, where to go and how to get financial and practical support. So if you're looking for an abortion fund in your area, you can go to abortionfunds.org. And I know in Chicago, if there's any people in the Midwest on this webinar, Chicago Abortion Fund and Midwest Access Coalition both provide support to abortion seekers.
I'm just gonna second and third. Abortion funds, if you're in the Southeast, Access Reproductive Care Southeast is an incredible abortion fund. So yeah, I would definitely direct someone to their support, because they really are doing the work to make sure that as many people as possible can get the care they need.
Awesome. Thank you all. Thank you to Annie for putting this together. Thank you to our wonderful panelists, Carrie, Agbo, and Lisa. Thank you so much for taking the time to share your expertise. And thank you to all of our attendees for tuning in today. I hope you all have a wonderful rest of your day and a restful weekend ahead. All right, take care, everybody. Bye.
Great to be here. Thanks so much.
Thank you.